Good evening, beautiful people. Welcome to another program. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. How are you all doing this evening? Thank you for coming to another stream. We have a lot of important topics and developments to get to. Thanks so much for being patient with me as I was getting things ready. You all know the drill. Please do hit the like button. That helps boost this stream in the YouTube algorithm. Also, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. And of course, there are great ways to support this program coming up on the holidays as I continue onward toward a sustainable model, all driven by you. You can go to my video description and find Patreon. That's the best place to support me. Patreon.com/DannyHaiFong. You can also support me on Substack. You can become a YouTube member, and there are one-time options like Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. But without further ado, everyone, please give me a quick sound check. How are you all doing? It is great to be with all of you on this Friday evening. It's a pretty momentous Friday evening because the world is literally on fire, and that's what this program is all about. It's about giving you the information so that you all can be the extinguishers, so you can all play a role. I'm on 1080 now on the YouTube stream, and I think my internet connection is good enough for it. But please do alarm me in the chat if there are any issues with lag or anything of that sort. Hopefully, I'll be alerted as well on the StreamYard. Without further ado, everyone, I'm just going to give you a rundown. We're going to start, of course, with the end of the truce in Gaza, in Palestine. We're going to go over what's happened since then, a bit of that. But more importantly, we're going to go over some of the discord that is surrounding the ongoing conflict, the ongoing brutal conflict, massacre, this absolute genocide that Israel is waging. We're going to go over not only what are some of these details about what's happened since then, but how, as Israel continues to go on, there's not only discord among the neocons, they're literally collapsing onto their knees, hoping and begging, and now there's leaked information back and forth between the U.S. and Israel, really attempting to sabotage each other into supporting one or the other's aims. So you have these so-called allies going at it, and you also have a regional war developing. You have the axis of resistance escalating and moving up that escalation ladder too, because they support Palestine. And so this conflict is heating up, and the end of the truce is a momentous step in a very, very, very hot war right now. We're also going to get into Ukraine. We're going to look at The Economist once again. If you want to put your finger on where the ruling class, the foreign policy establishment in particular, is in the United States, UK, and the collective West, The Economist is a great place to look at. Of course, it's through the UK lens, but it really does show how the entire collective West is thinking about things, and they are looking at a defeat in Ukraine, and they're admitting Russia is not just winning, but has won. And I'll show you what that looks like. Then we're going to get into China still rising. There's not a lot of China news these days. There's a lot of thawing. There's this illusion that the United States and China, the collective West and China, are on some kind of even plane now, that there isn't as much conflict. I'm going to show you what I like to do, which is my let's see how the mainstream media is looking at China right now. And it really does tell you exactly how afraid they are and how they're attempting to both leverage China's achievements and, of course, what they see as China's faults in a broader war against that country. So there's a lot to get to, and it's going to be a great stream tonight, okay? It's probably going to go a little late. It's going to be my last stream for a little bit because I am needing to do some traveling this weekend, and then I'll be back midweek next week, and I'll have some announcements hopefully over that time, and I'll definitely talk to you about what I'm working on at the end here. But with all that said, we have 1,000 people viewing already, so please do hit that like button. Keep doing so. We have about 353 likes. Hitting that like button helps boost the algorithm even further. We're going to get started right now, and we're gonna have a good time. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with the Israel story, because That is what everyone is talking about. So, the truce in Gaza was short lived. This was no surprise. Israeli officials from Netanyahu all the way down talked about how this was just a temporary pause. There were some prisoner exchanges that occurred, captives. There's thousands of them on the Israeli side. Israel has captured over 10,000 Palestinians over the years in its siege, in its war on Palestine. And of course, Hamas made good on its promises that it would release some of Israel's so called hostages. Now, the truce lasted about a week, and uh, of course, Israel didn't really follow it. They're trying to blame Palestinians for not following it. They're trying to blame Hamas. But the truth of the matter is that Israel wasn't following it from the very beginning because, as I had Alistair Crook on this program in the past, he said if you have a ceasefire in just one part of an entire territory or nation and there's fighting going on in another, it's not really a ceasefire. And of course, there were reports, several of them, that Israel was murdering Palestinians, imprisoning them in the West Bank. There's been an intensification of not just settler violence, but also Israeli state violence. So, all of this is to say is that now that the truce has ended, there are even bigger fish to fry than just the violence that's occurring. A lot of people are covering the violence. And we should, of course, talk about this horror that Israel is committing. Here is Al Mayadeen. Israel kills 60 Palestinians hours after the truce expired. They so far have killed 60 Palestinians, including medics and journalists, just hours after the truce in the Israeli occupation ended. I mean, we can keep going here because it gets worse. Here we have 109 martyred, a truck stranded as Israel renews aggression. Rafah has served as a sole entry point for aid into Gaza since Israel initiated a siege and bombardment of the coastal Palestinian territories. So immediately, the death, the destruction, it continued. But something else is going on when it comes to this conflict, and that is neocon, foreign policy establishment discord. There is a lot of disagreement, and I'm going to show you how regional resistance, the axis of resistance, is playing a huge role in this. But the US and Israel are not seeing eye to eye right now. That doesn't mean that the United States, I've said this over and over again, especially the Biden administration, Blinken, Austin, they agree with Israel's overall mission. They do not oppose what Israel is doing in theory. In practice, the United States, its ruling class administration, understands that not only is there an election on the way, but there's also the reputation of the United States that is at stake. It has been quite a while since the United States has been so directly involved in not a proxy war, but a full scale military operation. Of course, the proxy wars are devastating. Syria, of course, what happened in Libya was began as a proxy war, and then it went into a full scale military operation. Afghanistan was not a proxy war, but the United States tried to turn it into one after occupying the country, and then, of course, got kicked out. And we can go on and on and on, but it has been quite a while, and the Biden administration has attempted very diligently to, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to its dealings anywhere in the world, the Asia Pacific, the Middle East, to do it by proxy. And Israel is a proxy, but it is one that is capable of doing what it is doing now in Gaza, waging a full-scale military operation, one that is immensely grotesque and gruesome, and it's really having an impact on the United States' reputation worldwide. So there's a bit of a tit for tat going on between Israel and the United States. And here you have the New York Times, right? This is what they did in this tit for tat. they released information claiming that they had documents which indicate Israel knew about the attack on October 7th that started this whole thing. A blueprint reviewed by the Times laid out the attack in detail. Israeli officials dismissed it as aspirational and ignored specific warnings. Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for October 7th terrorist attacks more than a year before it happened, documents, emails, and interviews show. But Israeli military and intelligence officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. The approximately 40-page document, which Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. The translated document, which was reviewed by the New York Times, did not set a date for the attack, but described a methodical assault designed to overwhelm the fortifications around Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters. Hamas followed the blueprint with shocking precision. The document called for a barrage of rockets at the outset of the attack, drones to knock out the security cameras and automated machine guns along the border, and gunmen to pour into Israel en masse, in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. And so it goes on and on about the details, which we don't need to get into. They don't release and show the documents to the public, surprise, surprise, so we can't actually verify them. But it is very interesting, of course, that the United States would leak these to the intelligence would leak these to an incredibly important mainstream establishment publication like the New York Times. It's obviously a message to Israel. Now, Israel had its own kind of lambasting moment. Its moment of tit for tat with the United States and with the neocons. And of course, you can bet that the Zionists are indeed that. But nonetheless, they released leaks from Antony Blinken himself, basically lecturing Israel to change course. Here is the Times of Israel. Blinken said to tell Israel to change strategy in southern Gaza, suggesting it won't have months to win the war. According to leaked remarks from today's War Cabinet meeting, attended by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Blinken told Israel it cannot operate in southern Gaza in the way it has done in the north, a presumed reference to the heavy bombardment by air and crushing ground operation, and indicated that Israel has weeks, not months, to complete its declared mission of destroying Hamas. So this is the United States in this meeting literally telling Israel that it has to stop in a matter of weeks. And this is how Israel, and the Israeli government, Netanyahu in particular, is trying to stick it in the eye of the neocons in the United States that he obviously understands needs this war to end as quickly as possible. And I think Israel understands that it can't end as quickly as possible. Why? I'm going to show you why soon. The U.S. administration has repeatedly backed Israel's goal of eliminating Hamas in the wake of the October 7th slaughter of 1,200 Israelis, but has indicated it is increasingly troubled by the civilian fatalities and widespread destruction in the Hamas-run Strip. Blinken's reported remarks are quoted only in Hebrew translation by Channel 12 News and have been translated back into English here. Blinken, you can't operate in southern Gaza in the way you did in the north. There are 2 million Palestinians there. You need to evacuate fewer people from their homes, be more accurate in the attacks, not hit UN facilities, and ensure that there are enough protected areas for civilians. And if not, then not to attack where there is a civilian population. What is your system of operation? And then, of course, Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief, we follow a number of principles, proportionality, wrong, distinction, no, and the laws of war, absolutely not. They don't follow any of these things, but blah, blah, blah. But Blinken said to Yoav Galan, after he said the entire Israeli society is united by the goal of dismantling Hamas, even if it takes months, Blinken said, I don't think you have the credit for that. So basically, I don't think you have the money. You don't have the ability to do that over the long term. Blinken is sending a pretty big warning to Israel, and Israel was more than willing to out him. Now, the troubles are actually mounting. So people can look at the shock and awe destruction, the mass death of Palestinians in Gaza and also in the West Bank and all over Palestinian territory, as a show of strength and superiority on the part of Israel. And of course, the United States, which backs it. But of course, the public relations war has been lost. Public opinion worldwide around Israel, its stated aims, its objectives, how it conducts itself is at an all-time low. In the United States and the collective West, you see massive numbers of people out in protest, and you have poll numbers that indicate that Israel is, in fact, in trouble when it comes to how the world perceives it, including Americans, American Jews, Europeans, European Jews. There's a lot of discord and animosity toward Israel on the part of public opinion. But it's even worse than that, because despite all of the attempts to show superiority and to warn the world, really, but Palestinians in particular, that any act of resistance toward its occupation and its dastardly rule would be punished collectively, we see now that with the resumption of fighting after this very short-lived truce, that the possibilities of a regional war is really what is concerning the United States in a major way. And of course, the United States is the main player here, because no matter how influential Israel is over elections, no matter how tied behind the back that U.S. politicians, the foreign policy establishment, the neocons feel they are and believe they are, they still hold the keys to whether this conflict occurs or whether it subsides, right? They do hold those keys, whether this iteration of the war, of course, there will still be an occupation and all of that. The United States is never going to take the key out of the ignition to the point where it stops running. But in terms of the pace and intensity of what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank as well, the United States holds the keys. And right now, what the United States is looking at is the fear of a regional war that they can't win and they can't fight. So not only can Israel not win against Palestinian resistance, Hamas, whoever, they can't win. They're not even trying to win. They're just murdering. They're just bombing. They're not fighting Hamas. They're not out there hand-to-hand combat. That's not happening. There are no numbers. There's no data. There's no documentation. We have report after report in Ukraine who's dying. And of course, there's a lot of misinformation about it, but we do have numbers from many different sources over and over and over again in that war. We do not have that when it comes to what Israel is doing, because Israel does not want to count, or even they don't even want to count in a misleading way, because they know they aren't actually fighting Hamas at all. So here you have a U.S. Iranian miscalculation could lead to a larger war, says U.S. officials. U.S. forces and militias backed by Iran have launched a tit-for-tat attacks, fueling concerns as Israelis have also clashed with Iranian-backed groups. Of course, this was written just a couple of days ago before the truce ended. Of course, they're going to call it Iranian-backed. And some of these groups are, to an extent. But of course, as Alistair Crook has said on my show, as many people have said on my show, people actually across the region, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it is the Islamic resistance forces in Iraq and in Syria, there's a lot of groups that just do not agree with what Israel is doing and are willing to take up arms in order to fight in defense of Palestine and Palestinians. That is just a fact. That's a historical fact, but it definitely is a fact at the moment. So we'll just read a bit of this. Neither Washington nor Tehran wants a conflict in the Gaza Strip to trigger a wider war in the region, officials in both capitals say. But in the 7 weeks since October 7th, Hamas-led attack on Israel, Iranian-backed militias have launched more than 70 rocket and drone attacks against U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. The Pentagon, for its part, has responded with 4 rounds of airstrikes, killing as many as 15 people. So the U.S. is actively at war at the moment. That is not something that is talked about at all, really, that the United States is actually engaged in a shooting war. National security officials fear a miscalculation amid tit-for-tat attacks, combined with each side's belief that the other does not want a larger conflict, could trigger exactly that. A regional conflict just 2 years after the United States ended the war, 20 years of war in the Middle East and South Asia. Now, let's a caveat here. The United States actually didn't end anything. The United States was summarily ejected by the Taliban in Afghanistan But let's be honest, the United States has not withdrawn from war. It is still in a hybrid war with the entire region, especially Syria, especially Iran. Of course, this is misinformation. So far, none of the U.S. reprisal attacks have provoked an escalation. Even the one last week in Iraq that killed several militants with Kataib Hezbollah. The Pentagon said on Tuesday that the attacks had subsided, at least temporarily, because of the truce. But American military commanders and intelligence agencies continue to closely watch Iran, as well as the groups it supports, which include Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Syria and Iraq. A Navy warship in the southern Red Sea on Wednesday shot down a drone fired from Yemen that a U.S. military official said posed a threat to the ship. The problem with how people have been looking at this is that we've only been thinking about a short war in Gaza, said Vali Nasir, an Iran expert and professor of international affairs at Johns Hopkins CIA University, I like to call it. But he said Iran and Hezbollah believe that once Israel is done with Hamas, it will turn attention to them. If the United States is not careful, Gaza is only the beginning of something much, much bigger. So you get the picture here? I don't even have to go on there. That's the message. That this is not just about Palestine, that this end of the truce marks a dangerous moment for escalation of between the axis of resistance and the and of course the United States and Israel, which are very much interested, at least Israel is, in escalating wholesale. Now, the problem for the United States is it knows it can't fight the war. It would want to. Iran is a so-called adversary. Syria is a so-called adversary. The Hezbollah is as well. The Houthis in Yemen, definitely, because the U.S. supported Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc., in waging war on them in Yemen. So these are all adversaries. The United States is certainly not against waging war on them. The problem is the United States can't do it. It can't fight these wars. But the axis of resistance is, now that Israel is engaged again in these massacres, they're ready. Now, you've all probably seen, and I'm not going to play it here, but you've all seen the Houthis, Ansar Allah, the forces of resistance in Yemen that defeated Saudi Arabia. They have been seizing Israeli-owned cargo ships, and I believe they've seized at least 4 of them. And now they are ready to escalate. Yemeni armed forces announced their intention to escalate naval actions aiming to impede the passage of Israeli vessels through the Red Sea. The YAF, Yemeni Armed Forces, reiterates its readiness to resume its operations against the Israeli occupation in case the latter resumes its aggression on Gaza, which it has. So, again, there was always an indication that there was going to be a resumption of hostilities. Moreover, Yemen's military said it will not hesitate to expand the scope of its confrontation against the Israeli occupation, quote, to encompass targets Israel does not anticipate on land and in the sea. The statement confirmed that the Yemeni armed forces will cease their attacks on Israeli targets only once Israel ends its aggression on the Gaza Strip. Israeli-owned military vessels will not be allowed to sail in and out, well, it just says Israeli-owned vessels, in and out of the Red Sea, the Yemeni military confirmed. So, I mean, that's just one part of this. There's more. There's already confrontations happening, too, between the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and U.S. ships. Here you had, during the ceasefire, you had the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps intercepting a U.S. warship in the Gulf waters and forcing it to change course. A U.S. aircraft carrier that entered the Gulf waters was forced to change its course and land its helicopters after receiving a direct warning from Iranian naval forces, said the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy in Iran, General Alireza Tangsiri, said on Monday. The U.S. Central Command confirmed on Monday that the U.S. strike group led the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower past the Strait of Hormuz into the waters of the Gulf. CENTCOM added that the strike group would carry out patrols to ensure freedom of navigation, blah, 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 blah. But the point here is that there's already tit-for-tat engagements. This is already going on. And we can go on and on and on with this. Hezbollah is also engaged now, especially since the ceasefire has ended and that Israel has resumed its aggression, that Hezbollah has renewed its attacks on the Gaza Strip, 5 of them since the ceasefire began, and those are going to, or ceasefire ended, and those are going to increase. In support of the Palestinian people and Palestinian resistance on the Gaza Strip, the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, Hezbollah, executed 5 operations against Israeli military sites in occupied northern territories. Hezbollah announced that their fighters targeted a grouping of enemy soldiers in the vicinity of the Jalalabad military site of Israel. It is worth noting that the targeted site is located near the coast of occupied Palestine and is equipped with high-tech military-grade surveillance and spyware systems. Later, the Lebanese resistance conducted 2 simultaneous operations on the Al-Marj military site and the Ramim barracks. In the Al-Marj military site, resistance fighters targeted a grouping of Israeli occupation soldiers in the vicinity of the site, which is located opposite of the Lebanese town of Markaba in southeastern Lebanon. Just nearby, the resistance attacked targets in the Ramim barracks utilizing appropriate weapons. So Hezbollah is also engaged in escalating as well now that the aggression has started. So the United States and the neocons have a lot of reason to worry because Israel is not showing any indication that it is going to let up on its egregious assaults in Gaza. And not only this, but Israel has long had ambitions to expand into greater Israel. And oftentimes we put that in quotes. But really, the expulsion, the full annihilation of Palestinian people from the land of Palestine, from the territory of Palestine, the nation of Palestine, there is a significant section of the Israeli ruling elite that has always wanted this. Arguably, this has been the most influential in Israeli establishment politics since the beginning. And there has been decades and decades of documentation of this. I want to show you an excerpt of a very important book written on this to close out this segment because it gets into the plan of Greater Israel, which was articulated by a gentleman named Oded Yunan more than now 40 plus years ago. And I want to show you in The Hidden History of Zionism, a book written by Ralph Schoenman. In this chapter, he talks about the Oded Yunan plan. So I don't know if you can see that. The formatting is a bit difficult. Let me see if I can. It's still a little small, but nonetheless, let's try it out anyway. Here you have The Hidden History of Zionism, Strategy for Conquest is the chapter. It says, in 1982, while advanced preparations were being completed for the invasion of Lebanon and the massacre of Palestinians in the camps of Beirut, Sidon, and Tyre, a remarkable document was published in Kivanim, the journal of the Department of Information of the World Zionist Organization. Its author, Oded Yonan, was formerly attached to the military foreign ministry and reflects high-level thinking in the Israeli military and foreign policy establishment. The article, A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s, outlines a timetable for Israel to become an imperial regional power based upon the dissolution of Arab states. In discussing the vulnerability of the corrupt regimes in the Middle East, Yanan inadvertently exposes the full measure of their portrayal of the needs of the population and their inability to defend themselves or their people against imperial subjugation. So he goes over the various sections of this. So there's the divide and rule. He revives the idea of former Labor Foreign Minister Abba Aban that the Arab East is a mosaic of ethnic divergence. The form of rule, therefore, appropriate to the region is the millet system of the Ottoman Empire, whereas administrative rule was based upon local functionaries presiding over ethnic communities. So essentially, ethnicities, not nations, not unified secular or what have you governments, but ethnic groups. There would be rule based on ethnic division. Dissolving Lebanon was part of this plan. Lebanon was the model prepared for its role by the Israeli for 30 years. As the Sherat diaries revealed, it is the expansionist compulsion set forth by Herzl and Ben-Gurion, even as it is the logical extension of the Sherat diaries. The dissolution of Lebanon was proposed in 1919, planned in 1936, launched in 1954, and realized in 1982. Lebanon's total dissolution of 5 provinces serves as a precedent for the entire Arab world, including Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and the Arabian Peninsula, and is already following that track. So here you have these plans literally fragmenting Syria. I can go on and on. The assault on Iran, literally targeting Iraq. These things are happening. Double crossing Mubarak, aka Egypt, over and over and over again. Tomorrow, the Saudis depopulating Palestine, Jordan. We're talking about a plan to create total chaos, and it's happened. This plan has been implemented, not just in the wars that have occurred in Lebanon, not just in what Israel is doing to Palestine, also what's happened to Syria, what has happened to Iran, while these countries have been able to fight back. Egypt too, you've seen, or Egypt less of a fight back. There was some back in the day during the time of Nasser, but Egypt, Syria, I mean Libya was also in the Oded Yanan plan. It wasn't mentioned there, but all of these countries were seen as, all of these peoples and nations, right? The Arab nationalism that existed there was seen as the enemy of the Israeli project. And Israel always has had aims to not live in community, live in peace, but to expand outward and exploit chaos that they have been trying to sow for years and years as a means to get and achieve their objectives. So, indeed, the United States does have a lot to worry about, because at this moment in time, the United States does not have the capacity to fight such a conflict. The United States only has the ability for nuclear exchange at the moment. It's constantly complaining about money. It's constantly complaining about aid. It has overstretched itself in Ukraine, in the Asia Pacific. In confrontations, it views as more important than the Palestine question. It does not see eye to eye with Israel on this, no matter how much it may agree with Israel in theory, that Israel needs to be protected, that Israel needs to be defended, that Israel needs unconditional aid. Of course, I am not questioning the ideological fervor of U.S. imperial demagogues in the neocon foreign policy establishment. What is being questioned right now is the fact that Israel is basically not following the same timetable as the United States. That is what's going on here. The U.S. is self-serving. It is narrow. It cares only about itself. And Israel is in the same boat. And so what we have is a morass of destruction, but a possible, I'm not going to call it an exit ramp, but a possible fissure in friction that is being exposed by the day, by the hour, really, in this conflict. And now that the truce is over, now that there is nothing holding Israel back, it's going to be quite interesting to see how the United States responds to this crisis of legitimacy brewing for both Israel and itself, and how the region's escalating resistance in defense of Palestine, which is going to happen. They are going to climb their own escalation ladder, as they have said. All of these groups, the Houthis, Hezbollah, they've all said they're not going to sit around and watch, even as they're trying to be measured to prevent the unthinkable. So we're going to see a confluence of these forces really clash in the coming weeks. And it's quite clear that Israel and the United States, they are at a period of discord, because they're both on the ropes. They are not winning here. There is no victory. There is a lot of death. There's a lot of destruction. And there is a lot of decline in discord for the empire. That is all that is going to come out of this. These forces, these malign, reactionary, destructive, genocidal, imperial forces being led around by the foreign policy establishment, are losing ground in the most important way, politically, in terms of legitimacy, economically, in terms of viability. This is really the end times, to get a little biblical on the empire, not to copy the the fanaticism of Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. So this is what's going on, and we are going to have to not just talk about the injustice of Palestinians, but really look at how the injustice that is being faced by Palestinians is part of a world order that is crumbling, and join forces with those that are trying to build a new one, a new just order that respects the right of Palestinians to not just exist, but to have the basic and fundamental human rights that every single person on this planet, every single nation on this planet deserves. All right, everybody, that's the end of that story. I wanted to cover some of those regional machinations. Now we are going to get to the next story in about a minute or so. But before I get there, I would like you to hit that like button, please. That helps get more viewers here on YouTube. We have about 2,362 viewers, 926 likes. Let's get that up over 1,000 likes, and then the algorithm will keep on rolling in the right direction. I want to say hello to everyone on Rumble, the 43 people who are viewing on Rumble. I want to say hello to everyone on Rockfin, the 17 people there, viewers there. Please do follow me on those platforms at my name, Danny Dhaiphong. Also consider contributing to this channel and the work that I do by going to the video description and going to Patreon, Substack, PayPal, buy me a coffee, becoming a YouTube member, however you feel you are able to contribute. It all goes a long way in supporting my work. All right. So we are, I don't know why, is it, do I have something on my lip or something? Hold on one second. I do. Wow, I had some. All right. All right. All right, everyone. I do my own makeup. All right. So let's get to, I think I had something on my face that whole time, but you know what? It's part of showbiz, right? All right, everybody. With that said, hit that like button, hit that notifications bell. We're going to get to the next story. We're going to get to Ukraine. It is pretty monumental what's going on there. And how there are now admissions of Russia winning this war, having won, not just winning, but having won. So here we go. Some people say I had no idea wearing makeup. I don't. It was a joke. That would be too much. I've only put on makeup once, not myself, but when I went into RT Studio for Chris Hedges' show back when that existed. And it was very strange. I just, not that I knock makeup. If you want to wear it, go wear it. You know, I don't care, but it's just a lot, just a lot. All right. So we're going to get into Ukraine now, and then we're going to get into China. We'll have a full kind of global, global coverage. All right. All right, here we go. Bear with me as I get the sources ready. Russia has won. Russia has defeated Ukraine. The war is over. There's no more need for fighting. That's it. Ukraine is done. Well, not exactly. There hasn't been a full-scale victory. There hasn't been flags planted. The war hasn't stopped. There isn't a cessation of activity on the battlefield. There isn't a peace treaty. None of this has occurred. But in the minds of the Western mainstream media, Ukraine has been defeated. And when I say this, I am not using hyperbole. Ukraine has been defeated in the minds of the Western mainstream media because, you know what? I'm actually going to wait for this siren to go because it's actually quite frustrating and I really can't even focus. All right. So I'm going to start that segment over again. Give me 2 seconds. All right. Russia has won. The war is over. Ukraine is finished. There's no more need for fighting. Let's get the peace treaty going. Let it all end. The Western mainstream media is increasingly intimating that this is where their heads are at. Of course, they will never admit it rhetorically in this way. They'll never grovel, they'll never admit the full scale of the truth. But a recent Economist article shows that the foreign policy establishment in the collective West, with the United States at the lead, of course, but this includes the entire European Union establishment and all those NATO countries that go along with the war, they are beginning to think about this war having reached a conclusion, literally saying that Russia has won. This is now moving into an unprecedented level of admission and really turning on its head the narrative that we've heard for more, almost now 2 years, for more than a year and a half. We have heard Ukraine is going to win. NATO is going to help Ukraine win. There will be no concessions. We can't let Putin get away with it. This is a war for all wars, and NATO is all in. The United States is all in, and the only outcome that's acceptable for Ukraine is victory over Russia. And victory has many different definitions, but namely it was the expelling of Russia from all Ukrainian territory, so-called Ukrainian territory, and with some debate over Crimea. Now, The Economist is saying that Russia has won, which kind of flips on its head the entire narrative that they've been spewing for a year and a half plus. So this is The Economist from the end of November, the last day of November. Putin seems to be winning in the war in Ukraine for now. So as I said, they're never going to admit that this war is completely over. But the fact that they are willing to write in the pages of The Economist that Putin is winning, Russia, let's say, is winning the war in Ukraine is a monumental shift in the narrative. Putin's biggest asset is Europe's lack of strategic vision. So leave it to, this is The Economist is not a US publication, but leave it to essentially US controlled assets in Europe, vassals, to lay the blame on themselves. This has been Europe's degrading moment, biggest, probably most degrading moment in history since it became a colonial entity many centuries ago. This is one of the most humiliating moments for Europe in Europe's history. So this is what The Economist had to say. And I'm only going to read a bit of it because there's a lot that we need to get to with this, because this is a full-scale admission that goes across the board. So for the first time since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, he looks as if he could win. Russia's president has put his country on a war footing and strengthened his grip on power. He has procured military supplies abroad. And so here you're going to see a lot of propaganda. The idea that military supplies abroad is what is pushing pushing Russia into the fast track for victory, on the path of victory, pushing them on the path of it, is short-sighted and just a lie. It really is Russia's own industrial capacity, but they don't want to admit that. So they say it's abroad. Crucially, he is undermining the conviction in the West that Ukraine can and must emerge from the war as a thriving European democracy. The West could do a lot more to frustrate Putin. If it chose, it could deploy industrial and financial resources that dwarf Russia's. However, fatalism, complacency, and a shocking lack of strategic vision are getting in the way, especially in Europe. For its own sake, as well as Ukraine's, the West urgently needs to shake off its lethargy. So get this. Because the collective West, because the foreign policy establishment in the West cannot admit that Russia has advantages, what they've resorted to is attacking themselves. This is really historic in many ways. This is The Economist basically bad-mouthing all of Europe for not doing enough for Ukraine because they can't admit that Russia is winning on its own accord. That to me is a stunning development to see that on the pages of The Economist. The reason a Putin victory is possible is that winning is about endurance rather than capturing territory. Neither army is in a position to drive out the other from the land they currently control. Ukraine's counteroffensive has stalled. Russia is losing 900 men a day, and I'm going to show you how that's not true, to take Advika or Avdiivka, a city in the Donbass region. This is a defender's war, and it could last many years. So, one, Russia was never trying to take Ukrainian territory. How many times does Russia have to say it? How many times does its actions have to say it? Back in April of 2022, when there was this understanding a peace treaty could happen, what did Russia do? It pulled its forces from Kiev and surrounding Kiev as a gesture of goodwill. What did the United States and the UK and Kiev do? They completely threw up the peace agreement and burned it. They basically launched a flamethrower at it. So not only this, but it's just a lie. I just have to I have to correct this because you've probably been hearing from folks like Brian Berletic and the Duran that they are just outright lying about the numbers. And before we get more into this article, I just want to show you quickly Media Zona. Now, if you don't know what Media Zona is basically a think tank started, a media institute started by Pussy Riot and the anti-Putin. Literally, they call themselves the anti-Putin opposition in Russia or abroad. And they have absolutely no interest in covering up for Russia or Putin. But even their numbers, and they've been taking casualty numbers on the Russian side since the very beginning of this conflict, and working with BBC News Russian service and doing so. And I'm going to show you the numbers here, okay, because you can actually go into the days. And I'm actually going to so I don't want to I need to change the range here. All right. So last recorded, they say 900 people a day. There was 3 confirmed military deaths from November 29th. Last recorded. 3. Does that sound like 900 per day? 3. So again, yes, and some people are pointing out that killed in action is differently, and that's why I'm showing you of all troops engaged by Russia in this conflict, 3 confirmed military deaths, not 900 per day. We can even with a range further. Maybe you want to say November. Let's start from November 1st. 577. 1 month, not per day. So I just had to show you all that because this is from Media Zona. It is not a publication that is sympathetic to Putin or to Russia or anything of that sort. But let's get back to The Economist. So The Economist is lying through its teeth. Battlefield shapes politics. You might have heard Scott Ritter. I say it. Military conflict wars are an extension of politics. He says extension of politics by other means. Momentum affects morale. If Ukraine retreats, dissent in Kiev will grow louder. So will voices in the West saying sending Ukraine money and weapons is a waste. In 2024, at least, Russia will be in a stronger position to fight because it will have more drones and artillery shells because its army has developed successful electronic warfare tactics against some Ukrainian weapons, and because Putin will tolerate horrific casualties amongst men. What did I just show you? That's not true. Russia is actually fighting this war to not lose horrific numbers of soldiers. And not only this is an oversimplification. To believe that Russia is just winning this electronically with its air defense systems and with its ability to intercept drones All of that is just exposing Ukraine's own weaknesses because they don't want to admit that Russia's military industrial capacity, which was built and designed to fight this kind of war, eclipses that of Ukraine, which has already wasted all of its weapons and manpower now. So I don't even have to go through more of this because there is a lot more to show. And I want to play you now a clip from Scott Ritter, showing you why, because this really falls at the feet of the United States. The Economist is not a U.S. publication, but it might as well be at this point. Scott Ritter was on this a YouTube channel called Revolutionary Blackout Network. You should all follow them if you are not already. They had Scott Ritter on, and he gave such a good, and he'll be on this program very soon. But he gave a masterful assessment of why Russia will not lose. And the United States needs to be centered here because it is the United States that has attempted to fight this war through Ukraine and failed utterly to the point where now they have to admit that Russia is not just stalling a counteroffensive and a stalemate, but that they're winning. And in reality, this is an admission that they've won. So let's hear Scott.
Even with all this military deployment that we have, it doesn't make a difference because the Pentagon today can't win a war against a major opponent. All the money that we put into it, all the investment and such. Let's look at Ukraine right now. And we're going bankrupt supplying Ukraine with our money, our equipment. We've deployed 100,000 troops to Europe. We're talking about beefing up NATO forces. And we're just going flat broke. We're running out of stuff to give them. We can't produce enough artillery ammunition to sustain the operations. Meanwhile, Russia, on the other hand, this past year has mobilized 600,000 troops to fight in the special military operation.
You noticed how The Economist didn't mention any of this, what Scott Ritter is talking about. They're not mentioning any of this. So you have to rely on Scott Ritter, who knows a thing or two about war, to get this information.
They've also mobilized an additional 600,000 troops to expand their military from 900,000 to 1.5 million. Why? Because they want to invade? No, because we're expanding NATO. We're expanding NATO. We're inviting Finland and Sweden in there. That means that Russia now has to create new military districts and create new forces to man these military districts to protect themselves. We have a posture that says we're going to threaten the Arctic. So Russia has to build new forces to protect the Arctic. We're working with the Japanese and the Koreans to threaten the Russians in the Pacific. So they have to.
And China, by the way, and China. If we talk about the Pacific, this is also geared toward China.
Deploy forces there. But what I'm trying to say is that Russia's not having the same problem we're having. Russia's generated all these new troops, and they're winning a war in Ukraine right now. Even the mainstream media can't ignore that fact anymore.
As I just showed. And not only can they not ignore it, but they're saying that Russia has won, not just winning.
I don't think there's any mainstream media outlet that's saying, oh, no, Ukraine's secretly winning. Nope, they're losing. Everybody acknowledges this. Russia's has no ammunition shortage. Their defense industry has adapted in the time period to produce not only the artillery munitions, but the tanks, the armored vehicles, the artillery systems, new systems. Drone warfare is a whole new thing that's taking place right now. The Russians have reinvented drone warfare. Americans still are out there flying little plywood drones, or we're flying big, MQ-9 Reapers that'll get shot down in a real war.
Which are shot down very often. Iran has shot down MQ-9 Reapers. Of course, Russia has shot them down as well.
Russia's out there doing the real stuff, the way war's supposed to be fought. And yet here we are talking about we need more money to send another carrier battle group to the region. What's the carrier battle group going to do? Israel has a very large air force.
So he was couching this in the context of Israel. But you get the picture here. You get the picture that Russia does not have the problems that Ukraine has, that NATO has, that the United States has, because it's the United States that is overstretched and it's floundering. The United States cannot. It does not want to oversupply any one conflict, because if it does, it can't fight the big conflicts, the potential wars with Russia and China that become increasingly kinetic, increasingly confrontational. Russia and China are absolutely the ones who the United States is trying to prepare for, although it's quite clear that they're never going to be able to do this. If they can't supply Ukraine to defeat Russia on the battlefield, what makes anyone think that Russia and China somehow are going to lay down and play dead and not win some kind of military conflict with the United States? This is why the United States does not want to fight any such conflict. It's why the United States keeps such a huge nuclear arsenal. It's because they know that their empire is incredibly overstretched at the moment. And this is no more true than it is in Ukraine. This couldn't be any more true than it is in Ukraine. And so it's not just the mainstream media that's admitting that there are big problems here. Zelensky himself, who has been maybe the most stubborn of them all, here you have Zelensky accepts the counteroffensive has failed. So he began December accepting that it has failed. The Ukrainian president now believes the fact his troops are not retreating is a positive. So the fact that the troops aren't running away and not, defecting in complete and total numbers, that somehow is a positive. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky considers that fact that Kiev's troops are currently not retreating a good result in and of itself, according to an interview published by the Associated Press. He and his allies had previously criticized the country's military leadership for describing the situation as a quote-unquote stalemate. The new comments stand in stark contrast to bellicose predictions from Kiev ahead much of its hyped summer counteroffensive, which includes pledges to quickly retake Crimea. Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's top general, used the term in early November, triggering a barrage of criticisms from civilian officials, senior ones, and a rebuke from the president himself, who urged generals not to involve themselves in politics. Look, we are not backing down. I am satisfied, he said in the interview, powered by tens of billions of dollars of Western military aid, including heavy weaponry, yet not at forging the expected breakthrough. So he was so again admitting that this is a failure, that defeat is essentially here. Now, there's more. Okay. You also have Mr. Alexei Arestovich, the former top advisor to Zelensky. He has admitted, and I'll play you what he had to say. Glenn Deason shared it. He has admitted that Russia not only is winning now, but that all of this could have been prevented more and more. So you not only see now Russia, the Russian side, people who have been talking about the problems with this conflict from the very beginning. You not only see them talking about the peace deal in March, April 2022, but now you've had growing admissions. The top aide for Zelensky currently of the Servant of the People Party, he has admitted that the peace deal was a real thing. And now here you have Arestovich, and I'll play it in just a second. You have Arestovich saying the same thing. And so let's hear what he had to say.
Российская сторона все еще настаивала на мирных инициативах. И была возможно, и стамбульские мирные инициативы были очень.
The Russian side still insisted on peace initiatives, and the Istanbul peace initiatives were a very good intermediate document. Now, mind you, this is March 2022. April was when they came to an agreement early.
Я вам скажу, неплохие. Промежуточный документ, потому что все многие кричат статус на нейтральный в НАТО и так далее, и так далее. Мы никогда не могли.
Sorry, hold on. Because many people are shouting about the status of NATO neutrality and so on and so on.
Мы никогда не могли себе это позволить в НАТО перед.
We could never afford it in NATO, before NATO. But first of all, where is this NATO? Does it accept us or not?
НАТО, ну, во-первых, где это НАТО, принимает оно нас или нет. А во-вторых, давайте это и примет.
And secondly, let's do it this way. Now, Putin definitely puts this as a new condition.
Во-вторых, давайте так, сейчас-то Путин точно выставит это в качестве новых условий и выставляет уже фактически. Они сказали никакого НАТО.
They said that there is no NATO under no circumstances. This is a red line for us. Ukraine joining NATO was a red line.
Ни при каких условиях, это для нас красная линия. Но только теперь 200 тысяч или сколько, 300 тысяч человек были бы живы. Возможно. И пол Украины не было бы разрушено.
Perhaps, and half of Ukraine would not have been destroyed in mines. So essentially he's saying that 200 to 300,000 people would not have died in this conflict, and that half of Ukraine would not have been destroyed by the fighting.
Заминировано. Еще не было никаких шахедов, еще ничего не летело нам на голову.
There were no shaheeds yet. Nothing had flown into our heads, and so on and so forth.
И так далее, и так далее. Это большой вопрос. Я ни да, ни нет не спешу ответить.
This is a big question. I'm not in a hurry to answer yes or no. I just take it at face value for discussion.
Я просто понимаю на должную планку для обсуждения. Так вот, того не надо было подписать.
So was it necessary to sign a peace agreement in Istanbul, which they signed? They did sign it.
Мирное соглашение в Стамбуле, потому что такого пакета, в том числе, там россияне были согласны на
The Russians agreed to a political discussion on Crimea. I'm not so sure about that.
Дискуссию по Крыму. На секундочку. Это чуть ли не акт поражения России они подписывали. Как бы, да.
So he's claiming, and I don't agree with this one bit, that Russia was signaling kind of a defeat because it was willing to talk about Crimea. I don't believe that for a second.
Мы там тоже шли на уступки, но сумма уступок, на которые шли они, но...
The amount of concessions they made was unprecedented, which I do believe. I do believe that there were concessions. The biggest one was stopping the fighting and basically keeping the realm of protection to the Donbass. So I believe that's true.
Я вам скажу, было беспрецедентно. Такого уже никогда не будет. Они будут продавливать все больше и больше.
This will never happen again. They will be crushed more and more. Yeah, I mean, Arestovich is right there. So Alexei Arestovich, I mean, he's a very mixed bag. He's come into his own kind of individual personality. But as you can see, there's still some baggage there. But some truths that he's revealing that are hard truths. One, that this is never happening again. Why would Russia? There's no stalemate. That's Arestovich saying. No stalemate. There's no need for Russia to negotiate with us anymore. They already did. They had agreed to stop the fighting, and they did so on terms that were favorable. And not only this, but Ukraine is just absolutely and utterly humiliated. This is what happens to client and puppet regimes that end up playing dirty ball, being basically the launching pads for US and NATO wars. There's always humiliation inevitably involved. And here you have Zelensky now admitting that Ukraine may never get to join NATO. So this was the stipulation that set it all off. This was the stipulation that was a red line for Russia, and it was absolutely non-negotiable for NATO, for the United States, and for Zelensky, who has been rabidly trying his best to position himself as the water boy for the American empire. And in doing so, he has suffered one of the biggest humiliations, I think, in the history of puppet leadership of semi-colonial, neo-colonial, and just outright junior partners of the United States. Now he's admitting that there's going to be no NATO. We don't know how it will turn out, he said. No one will be able to answer that for sure. Either we will be in NATO or we won't be in NATO. We want to, but when allies agree and conditions are met, is what Mr. Blinken, it's what Jens Stoltenberg, it's what all of them are saying. And so he gave this at a talk to students at some university. And that's the humiliation. I mean, this is what else? What else is there to say when it comes to Ukraine? The biggest, I think, takeaway here is that there is no hope for the NATO side. There is no hope for the U.S. side. They are now admitting over and over again that the war is a losing venture, that the counteroffensive, forget the counteroffensive, it's gone, it's over. They've tried the stalemate talk, but now The Economist is actually talking about losing. And it's one of those moments in history that really, I think, should hit us hard in the sense that all of this is being done in relative quiet. Now that there's a huge war again in West Asia, one that has, of course, historic implications given the Palestine question is now 70 plus years old, and one that is only going in the wrong direction when it comes to those aggressors within that conflict. Because we're in that historic moment there, we're kind of missing the historic moment here with Ukraine, with the United States and NATO, with Russia. We are witnessing a full-scale defeat happening at a level that is historically unprecedented. This is an unprecedented moment of defeat. It's not going to be tied up in a bow in the next week or month. The low-level conflict that is occurring now could last for years, but it won't change the outcome, and it won't change the conclusion. And in fact, the more time that this conflict eats up for the United States and NATO, the weaker that all parties on their side become. Zelensky, of course, is in big trouble. NATO is in disarray. NATO is not well prepared for the conflicts that it has set out. It is not prepared for the utterly disastrous and dangerous wars that it has in its, up its sleeve. And the United States itself, as the leader, as the commander-in-chief of NATO, is also in a politically, economically, and militarily tenuous place. So all of this is only set to get worse because Russia, its terms, are the only terms that are going to determine what happens here. Russia could decide one day, which it won't, but hypothetically, Russia could decide we're just going to steamroll, and NATO would be able to do nothing about it. It would cry, it would whine, and it would threaten, and maybe it would try to enact some kind of punishment, threaten nuclear war, whatever. But Russia could if it wanted to, but it doesn't. Why? Because Russia doesn't have the same aims. It's not a colonial power. It's not an imperial power. It doesn't have the aims of the United States. That's how the United States would behave. The United States would see a conflict like this and look to take as much advantage of it, as much territory, as much influence, and as much control as it can. Russia, on the other hand, is not interested in Kiev. It's not interested in administering Ukraine. What it's interested in is protecting the people of the Donbass, protecting Russian ethnic groups and nationals, those of Russian nationality. And it is interested in preventing NATO expansion. And in these aims, it has had immense success that we will be learning from for many years to come, success that will go down in the real historical record that the mainstream Western media, the U.S. and Western collective West political class, the talking heads, the think tanks, and of course, the big corporate backers and military backers behind it, they will not cover this. So now that The Economist is admitting defeat, we can see it at all levels, but they're admitting defeat in their own way. They're not going to admit it in the way that we understand it. We understand the defeat to be total, to be squarely at the feet of the United States and of NATO. The collective West itself is going to, one, blame itself for reasons completely different because they can't acknowledge what is happening here. They can't acknowledge that Russia is now a superpower again, that Russia is not to be bullied, and that Russia can set terms regionally for itself. It does have sovereignty in a manner that absolutely undermines the United States' vision for what domination, for what hegemony, and for what imperial rule looks like into this historic period. And that's just the facts. That is where the defeat squarely lies. That is where this history shaking and shifting moment truly takes center stage. And we are going to have to continue to follow this development because it's only going to get worse from here for NATO, for the United States, for Zelensky, for Ukraine. And I will be here covering it every step of the way. We got 2,400 viewers, 1,400 likes or so. Let's hit that like button. Let's try to catch up to the number of viewers. If you haven't hit the like button yet, please do. That helps get more people in the algorithm. Thank you to all who have showed up tonight. We have one more topic to go before we do some closing remarks and some shout outs, announcements, and what have you. So while you're waiting for the next topic to get started, of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. And also, please do, if you can, go to the video description, check out Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube membership, all of the different ways to support this work in this channel. All right. You asked me, I got to drink just water. If I were to drink something like alcohol or something like that now, I would be so dehydrated. I'm in an apartment now that I can't control the heating here, and let's just say it is dry as the driest you can imagine. I am like actually suffering here. All right, everybody. Let's get started. Next topic. We have another topic. All right. And we're going to move to China. The not people say get a humidifier. Believe me, I've tried that. It works, but it's quite a lot of upkeep for a busy life. But good suggestion. It's going to happen. We're going to go to China now because, as you might have noticed, China is not in the news. There was a lot of hope that this Xi-Biden meeting would lead to a complete change in relations. But as you could have predicted, what you have now is a temporary pause, kind of like a ceasefire, if you will, on the hybrid war that the United States is waging. So we're going to get started on that right now. The United States, the neocons, the collective West have been warned on several occasions by China that the aggression that has been leveled upon it over the course of many years now is unacceptable. And we've entered a period now of relative quiet, at least in the sense of the focus of the foreign policy establishment led by the collective West in the United States, in large part because the United States itself is overstretched. It cannot handle what is going on in terms of the wars that it is supporting, one being the war in Ukraine, and two being the war that Israel, the massive war that Israel is waging in a very tiny Gaza strip of Palestinian territory, already unlivable before that war. So, by all effective measures, the United States is having a difficult time managing wars on those fronts. But yet, at the same time, this relative quiet between the US and China is fraudulent. What's interesting to note now when it comes to China and how the United States and its vassal Western countries, the vassal states in the collective West, what's interesting to note about their approach to China now is that it is rife with, you could call it almost a bipolar, not to use that term lightly, but it's rife with a kind of chaotic energy that is both acknowledging the utter ineptitudes and inability to wage a conflict with China at any level, acknowledging China's achievements, acknowledging China's rise as basically an inevitable fact of history. And on the other side, you have just innumerable, not just reports, but also postures from the United States and its vassal states that show that this war is far from over, and it really is just beginning. So, one of the ways that the United States has attempted to cope with this period of quiet, basically an acknowledgement that it can't fight a war with China right now, is by attempting to denigrate China. So you have elections coming up in Taiwan province, in the Taiwan authorities in China. And of course, the United States has been supporting separatism there. But this from Tsai Ing-wen is kind of characteristic of what I'm talking about. She says that China is too busy to occupy Taiwan because it's overwhelmed with domestic issues. She spoke at an event hosted by the New York Times, just showing how much of a puppet she really is. Tsai Ing-wen said the chances for war remain low, citing both strong international support for Taiwan and a reluctance by Beijing given its economic and financial as well as political challenges. So as I said before, I mean, let's be honest, Tsai Ing-wen is literally out in 2024 no matter what happens in the election, even if the DPP wins. She, because of their horrific standing in the local elections back in November of 2022, she's gone come election season in February 2024. So Tsai Ing-wen now, or at least as head of the party, she, and she's not running for president, so she's gone. Now, the point here is that this is the narrative that the China hawks are trying to formulate, but they're having a hard time maintaining the fact that there's no truth behind it. There's no truth behind this idea that China is collapsing. It's the Gordon Chang again. It's rather than China warning the U.S. stopping this aggression, which it constantly does. Now you have the United States and the collective West, and you have Tsai Ing-wen warning that, oh, actually, there's not so much of a problem because China's weak. So here you have McKinsey, this, of course, this monstrous corporation responsible for the plunder and poverty of billions worldwide. But you have McKinsey saying that China consumption shows no sign of a V-shaped recovery. China's retail sales have generally remained lackluster since the onset of COVID-19. I'm hopeful we will see an incremental improvement over the next year, but there are no signs of a V-shaped recovery. They said at McKinsey that there's a clear shift in China for consumers to spend on services rather than goods. So again, this is another indication that the Western foreign policy establishment, the U.S. foreign policy establishment, is trying to convince us that China is in fact in decline. Now, the problem with trying to prove that China is in decline, that its economy is in tatters, you'll probably see that everywhere, is not only is it not true, but there's also the Western mainstream media admitting as such. Contrasting China November factory surveys highlight need for stronger stimulus. It says mix. Oh, this is not the story that I had. Hold on one second. Okay. Well, they changed the title. This is hilarious. The title, I can't show you the hyperlink, the original title. They must have changed it. China factory activity surprisingly expands in November, says Cashin. Now it says contrasting China November factory surveys highlight need for stronger stimulus. So do you see what I'm getting at? Even in just this one article report, they had to change the title because obviously they found it too favorable to China. So what it says is mixed factory activity data for China in November suggests more stimulus will be needed to shore up economic growth. China's economy struggled, they say, to mount a strong post-COVID recovery due to ailing housing market, local government debt risks, and slow global growth. That has squeezed factory owners who have to contend with high input costs, overcapacity, soft demand, with officials prioritizing rescuing other parts of the economy. The Cashin S&P Global Manufacturing Purchasers Managers Index unexpectedly rose to 50.7 in November from a 49.5% reading in November. That was the fastest expansion in 3 months, but stands in contrast to the official PMI, which fell on Thursday. The 50-point mark separates growth from contraction. At face value, the average of the two is consistent with factory activity remaining largely unchanged in the last month. But that may not be the case in practice. The hard data have held up better than survey-based measures. The economy is running at different speeds across industries, though we expect the policy stance to remain proactive, which will help sustain overall growth momentum in the coming quarters. So do you see what I'm saying here? They are literally saying so many different things, because on the one hand, they need to make China look bad. Literally in that article, they need to make China look bad. China's collapsing. Its economy is declining. Oh, the housing market. Oh, no, local government debt risk. Oh, man, global. They blame China for global economic slowdown, which, in fact, the United States and Europe are primarily the reason for that. But nonetheless, the point here is that even in that publication, they had to change the title because what the article was actually supposed to be about is how factory productivity was up in that month, surprisingly, given that it had been relatively stagnant. So, and we're going to go on and on and on here. All right. We're going to move now to the semiconductor. So you heard in that article that China's policy is very intentional here. And I'm actually just going to highlight this because I want to start from this section. But the title of the article is China Secretly Transforms Huawei into Most Powerful Chip War Weapon. The government is increasingly relying on Huawei, the company Washington tried to destroy, to lead the country's efforts to build an independent semiconductor system. And these articles are coming out more and more so on China's semiconductor successes. And the reason for this is because the collective West, mainly the United States especially, is now up to speed with the fact that its sanctions have failed too. So this is a problem for the United States. And I'm gonna scroll down here where it says, in the ensuing fight for survival from Huawei, after the U.S. blacklisting in 2009, Ren, who's the chief executive and founder, moved as many as 10,000 developers onto 24-hour shifts in a race to redesign circuit boards and software so they could function without American technology. At the busiest time, some staff didn't set foot outside of the Shenzhen campus for days, living on instant noodles and sleeping in chairs. That all-out effort kept the company in business, and around this time, the Chinese state began to step up its support, paving the way for today's interdependent relationship. To see how deeply Huawei and the Chinese government are intertwined, look no further than the launch in August of the new Mate 60 Pro smartphone. Huawei timed the release of the phone to coincide with U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo's visit to China, in part because of direct encouragement from a senior official at the top of the regime, according to a person familiar with matters of the situation who asked not to be identified. They decided it was time for China to show some muscle. The request surprised Huawei, which had planned to release the phone at a later date. And while the company made the launch date, there was no time for the normal pizzazz or even proper press event. Huawei denied the government officials asked Huawei Mate Pro 60 to be introduced sooner than originally planned. The significance of the phone was the high proportion of advanced made in China components it contained, in particular a 7-nanometer processor from Shanghai Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation. Hailed by the state press as a patriotic triumph, it sparked a fervent debate within the U.S. about whether its efforts to slow China's technical advance were falling short. So you have now more and more admissions. That's how they admit that they have fallen short and failed. And they go on to talk about the concern about this and how they did it and how they're trying to make the link that government support is the reason. And now that is not a crime. Of course, China has been criminalized because it is said that China is spying on the United States, China is stealing technology from the United States, China is doing X, Y, and Z to the United States. So that is why it is nefarious for the Chinese government to subsidize its big tech sector. But we have to be honest, even in Western capitalist, neoliberal countries, the government subsidizes industries in huge ways, tax breaks, tax cuts, all sorts of ways. Sometimes when it comes to military contractors, direct infusions of straight cash, much of which we don't know where it even goes. So all this is to say is that China was not doing anything wrong here, but the big point is that they are admitting, the United States is, that they have failed. And so part of this respite when it comes to the United States, when it comes to the Biden administration attempting to play at diplomacy, part of it is an admission that there is no room for this conflict to succeed, no matter how much they try to make you believe that China is the one declining, China is the one whose rise is being stalled and is stagnant. No matter how much they try to make you believe that, the facts say differently. Now let's move on to the way that the United States has attempted, the mainstream Western media, as well as the United States, has attempted to frame China as a weak country when it comes to the countries that the United States is trying to organize in its camp. Let's start with India. Move aside China, says the CNBC. India will drive Asia's growth in the next few years, S&P Global says. Asia Pacific's economic growth will no longer be driven by China next year. Instead, South Asia and Southeast Asia will be the growth engine. So hold on one second. Where's China located again? Is it Southeast Asia, perhaps? I know China, of course, is a really big country, so it kind of spans the whole of East Asia. This is an odd statement, to say the least. India's GDP growth is expected to reach 6.4% in 2024 and 7% in 2026. On the other hand, China is expected to come in at 5.4% next year, just a 0.6% rise, 4.6 in 2024 and 4.4% previously, said the credit rating. Now, mind you, I don't think S&P knows anything about China's economic growth. We don't know how fast China will grow. But we do know that regardless of this, the idea that just because India is posting slightly higher economic growth numbers, and as this article says, India's GDP for the fiscal year ending in 2024 of March is predicted at 6.4%. S&P lowered its growth outlook for India already from 6.5% in 2025 to their previous percent of 6.9%. In comparison, they're saying that China is predicted to come in at 5.4% at the end of this year, 0.6% higher than S&P's previous forecast, while growth of 2024 is to be 4.6%, higher than the forecast, but of course lower than India's. So basically what they're trying to tell you is, with all the factors they keep citing, real estate and currency issues and the lower demand and consumer malaise and all this stuff, that India is going to replace. This is what they want to believe. They want to dream that India, a more compliant government, one that is in love with Israel, one that is willing to play ball in the Quad, despite its own sovereign ambitions, getting closer to Russia, joining, being a part of BRICS. India still plays ball with the United States. So the United States dreams and hopes, really does. It dreams, it has wet dreams that it will surpass China. Now, it's very laughable, really. It's very laughable because I want to show you. I posted this graph on my Telegram, but Cyrus Jansen did on his Twitter. Cyrus Jansen talks about this is why India will not replace China as the world's manufacturing superpower. Let's look at this graph, okay? This is from the World Bank. So to look at economic growth squarely from GDP terms, or to look at economic influence and importance, is very narrow-minded. And one big reason for that when it comes to China is that China has now fully shifted into focus on quality growth. China is no longer focused on growth for growth's sake. The reason for this is because China has grown immensely over the years. It's the second largest economy, and it's going to be the largest in the next decade and maybe sooner. But also, China was never organized as an economy that squarely was designed to meet the profit goals, the margins of shareholders, investors, basically wealthy so-called entrepreneurs, corporatists, capitalists, monopolists. It was never designed to just do that, like in the collective West. That's why there's such an emphasis on GDP in the collective West, is because those economies are all designed to squarely look at the profit margins of those biggest corporations that essentially own and drive the entire economic life of that, of that system and of that block. And here you have the share of manufacturing. Look at this. It really hasn't went up that much, from almost 0% in 2000 to now close to 3 to 4% in 2022 for India. Look at China. Share of global manufacturing, above 7%, about 7, 8%. It looks like in 2000. Now look at it, over 30%. So China's influence in manufacturing, the heartbeat of global economy, no matter what system you're talking about, it is manufacturing. It is producing things that will always be the driving force of economic life worldwide. Because no matter how many financial instruments you create, how advanced technology gets, you have to produce it. You have to produce things. This is the labor theory of value. This is why, if you don't have an understanding of labor and how labor factors in to economic growth, the relationship of labor to society, to the economy, if you don't understand that, you do not understand economics. That is just 100% the truth. And so here's what Cyrus Jansen had to say, and I'll add to it. He said, India's share of global manufacturing has remained unchanged for 2 decades, hovering around 3%. China, on the other hand, went from 7% global share in 2000 to now 33% in the year 2023. There are 3 factors on why China remains the top manufacturer: quality, efficiency, and logistics. Take a look at Foxconn, producer for iPhones, and their recent experience building iPhone factories in India. Foxconn has been heavily investing its iPhone factory in Sangarvachatram, but with the factory's higher material costs and a greater percentage of defective phones, the company has struggled to replicate the cutthroat efficacy efficiency it is known for. As a result, the iPhones produced by Foxconn in India have been less profitable than those in China, and that's from a source coming out of India. China isn't the cheapest place to manufacture. Wages have increased 7-fold over the past 2 decades, but China has also grown from a country known for producing cheap products to a powerhouse who can produce high-end products in the most efficient manner possible. This is the China advantage. And I will add to this, because Cyrus is correct, but there's more to it. China also makes up a large part of India's import market, meaning that a lot of India's inputs, what it has to input to its manufacturing capacity, comes from China anyway. So in truth, China is not in decline to India. It is not losing to India. The United States can dream all it wants of that possibility, but the fact of the matter is that was never in the cards. So we can go on and on and on about this because it just keeps going. Right? The United States also wants to turn Vietnam against China and wants to look at Vietnam as the potential next phase of economic development away from China. We can decouple. But now China and Vietnam have been getting closer and closer. I was just in Vietnam, and while I couldn't necessarily attest to that fact while I was there, it was quite clear from those I spoke to who had a legitimate standing within Vietnamese society, who understood the political situation and the leadership of the government, that the position on China is they are our friends for economic development and growth, and that's not going to change. And so China and Vietnam recently just met. Wang Yi, the foreign minister, the top diplomat, met with the Communist Party of Vietnam's General Secretary, Nguyen Phu Trong, in Hanoi. So they just completed a 2-day visit, and they talked about the comprehensive strategic partnership, 15 years of it, common aspirations. They agreed to enhance efficiency of trade, investment, cooperation, traffic connections, railways, roads, border gate infrastructure, improve customs and clearance efficiency, smooth trade, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all important because Vietnam has a lot of infrastructure needs, okay? A lot of infrastructure needs. Observers agreed on the potential of bilateral trade, which has made notable achievements. China is Vietnam's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade hitting $234.9 billion in 2022. It's become China's biggest trading partner among the 10 ASEAN members, said Xinhua News. Infrastructure is a bottleneck for Vietnam's economic growth. It is a need for better railway connectivity, while China has the technological and financial advantages, adding that the success of the China-Laos Railway has been a stimulus for Vietnam to enhance railway cooperation with China. In the first half of 2023, China poured $1.3 billion into 233 projects in Vietnam, becoming the 3rd largest foreign direct investment source after Singapore and Japan. Currently, China is in the 6th position of 143 countries and regions investing in Vietnam, with 3,791 valid projects valued at more than 25 billion. And so there are divergences, right? Because Vietnam's trying to be autonomous. It's balancing a relationship with Washington and Japan, which now are also strategic partners of Vietnam. And so there are risks in the South China Sea that they acknowledge. There are disagreements. They need to manage these intelligently. But from that statement, you get the idea that the United States is not succeeding and can't really claim to have succeeded in bringing Vietnam into its camp or in pushing factually India as a replacement in the world economy to China, that China is in decline and India is suddenly on the rise, that Vietnam is now suddenly in the U.S. camp. All of these parts of the U.S.'s plan to militarily, economically strangle China are failing dramatically. And I was just in Vietnam, and all I could say every time I was there, despite the impressive development, the achievements of the Vietnamese people, I could only say to myself, Vietnam and China's partnership is going to be so critical for Vietnam to upgrade its infrastructure, to start to catch up to its biggest partner, Laos. Laos is its strongest friend in the region, to catch up to Laos in the area of high-speed rail. China helped build Laos's first high-speed rail. China can help Vietnam do the same. The roads, all the infrastructure that's necessary to increase economic growth to a higher level, to bring Vietnam from a lower technical and value output to a higher level, will depend in large part on its relationship with China, which has, as the article stated in the Global Times, the advantages. So that's the theme here. China has the advantages. It isn't the United States that is going to win some kind of conflict right now. It's why Biden has had to back off at least until the election season heats up. It's why these entanglements in Gaza, in Ukraine, are so much more of a priority. It's because there is nothing the United States can do. And I'll show you one last example of this. Joe Biden has now implemented a very quietly more investment bans on various sectors of the world economy with regard to China. This time, the electric vehicle industry, one that Biden has touted is so important to his administration's ambitions. Biden's latest China crackdown puts his latest EV ambitions at risk, says Politico. The new rules could reduce the number of electric cars that qualify for federal subsidies. So the Biden administration rolled out rules for electric vehicle tax credits on Friday that clamped down on Chinese imports, but threatened to slow the U.S. transition away from fossil fuels by slashing the number of cars that qualify. The long-awaited guidance on accessing the tax credits is emblematic of the minefield the Biden administration has had to navigate as it seeks to advance its ambitious climate agenda while at the same time breaking Chinese dominance of the batteries and critical minerals needed to fuel the transition to EV. The rules disqualify a vehicle from receiving the credit if even one of its suppliers has loose ties to Beijing, such as producing parts in China or having as little as 25% of board seats controlled by China. In certain instances, even an American supplier merely relying on licensed Chinese technology could be barred from the credit under the new rules. So, mind you, we're talking about subsidization. What were we talking about earlier? The problems with subsidizing Huawei. Here you have the United States literally trying to subsidize the electric vehicle industry and the Biden administration using its warmongering against China to prevent it. Do you see what I'm saying here? Like, this is typical shooting oneself in the foot. This industry is done. It's finished if this is allowed to happen. It is unclear whether it will be allowed to stand, whether there won't be loopholes or what have you. But this has been a long process dating back to the Uyghur Human Rights Act that the Biden administration signed. I believe that was December of 2022. That was geared also toward attacking China's polysilicon industry in Xinjiang region. It was geared towards slowing down the process of China's advantages when it comes to renewable energy production and, of course, distribution, which the United States, as corporations trying to produce electric vehicles, have to rely on. They have to rely on the supply chain because China has the goods and the U.S. does not yet. And it probably will never have, especially given this. It comes months After an earlier Treasury rule on domestic manufacturing locked out many vehicles from European, Japanese, and South Korean automakers from receiving the tax credit, around 22 electric and plug-in hybrid models currently qualify for the credit, less than 1/5 of the more than 100 models on the market. It's not clear how many of these cars will remain eligible when the rules take effect in January. The stringent rules are a victory for China hawks seeking to cut U.S. reliance on the country, while automakers like Ford, which is planning to license Chinese battery technology for a plant in Michigan, will need to reassess whether they can sell their cars with a tax break attached. Getting Americans behind the wheel of electric cars is a key pillar of the President Joe Biden's climate agenda, and the tax credit is his foremost lever to get them there. It can shave up to $7,500 off the price of an electric car, making them affordable for a new range of drivers. But Democrats in Congress imposed a series of escalating domestic content restrictions in last year's Inflation Reduction Act aimed at cutting China out of the U.S. EV supply chain. While China still dominates that supply chain for key parts of the vehicles, noting the batteries used to power them, administration officials expressed confidence that automakers would be able to meet the new rules, highlighting the billions of dollars they've poured into new manufacturing facilities in the U.S. So they're trying to say that they'll be able to handle it. But let's be quite frank. What they're not telling you here is that it's not just that China produces the component parts. China produces the cars. China produces a whole lot of electric vehicles, and they have relationships with the Europeans, with the Japanese, with all of these electric vehicle manufacturers in China. They're a huge domestic market themselves. So what the United States is effectively doing is not only hindering their own production, but they're also destroying their ability to actually compete at the level of economic competition. That is what the United States is doing, but that is how this war is being fought. It's being fought in a hybrid manner. It's being fought in a proxy, like a total proxy, comprehensive war that has not ended. All that has come about in the last several months is the growing reality that the U.S. empire is outstretched and that it just cannot, at this moment, just at this moment, in the lead up to the 2024 elections, in the lead up to the dwindling prospects in Ukraine, to the eventual shift in changes, possibly a conclusion to the most excessive parts of Israel's onslaught of Gaza. All of this points to the fact that the United States has just tapped out for the moment, that they have to pause, and it's driving them nuts. It's driving the neocons nuts. It's driving the Biden administration. The Biden administration couldn't help itself but to continue to pursue reckless restrictions, import restrictions, investment restrictions on Chinese technology and electric vehicles. It cannot help the United States' foreign policy establishment in the mainstream media. They cannot help but panic about Huawei and what they've been able to do. They cannot help but constantly try to push this notion that China is collapsing, because the fact of the matter is they can't do nothing about China. It is over. There is nothing they can do about China. China's rise is inevitable. China's rise is going to continue. China's rise is going to play a more and more influential role in the world, and that is unchanged. And China is not. Do we see panic coming out of China? Do we see mass migration out of China? Do we see collapse in China? Do we see dwindling confidence in China? We don't see any of that. I was just there. There's none of that. There's external realities like a global economic slowdown, sure. There are external realities like the fact that the United States is trying to level sanction after sanction and divide up the world against China. And there's also internal problems that have been longstanding, given that with new achievements, with new progress and development, there's always going to be new challenges. But none of it leads to panic. None of it leads to decline. All of that is fantasy. To think that a country that leads the world in all the most important areas, from renewable energy production to high technology, patents, we can go on and on. China leads the world in all of these things. In major infrastructure, in the most advanced infrastructure, high-speed rail leads the world. We can go on and on and on with where China leads. And if we look at the United States in the same manner, we would see the United States nowhere close. And that's because of the fact that the United States has not ceased its warmongering against China. It has not ceased its warmongering anywhere. It is attempting to fight many wars and has just so happened bitten off more than it can chew. So that's why it appears that Biden met with Xi Jinping and there's been all these meetings between the US and China. So things must be fine. No, they're not fine. The United States wants to continue this war. The ruling class wants to continue this war. The neocons want to continue this war, but they can't. They have conceded once again, another example of conceding defeat, especially in this moment. And in reality, that's not going to change. They know it. They understand it. They understand this problem. But the forces at play, those that control the sinking ship of the US empire, cannot change directions. Not just because they don't want to, but they literally cannot. To do so is to delegitimize completely their very existence, not just the careers of people like Antony Blinken, but those who make their careers, those at the top, those who actually control things, those lobbyists, those corporations, corporate executives, those investors, those who see China, the militarists, the military industrial complex, those who see China as a true threat because of the way China not only organizes its internal domestic economy, i.e., looking at a state subsidized Huawei as a threat to the future of US economic supremacy, those who see in the military brass as China as a threat to US hegemony, because guess what? Countries want to not only do business with China, but they want China to start mediating, brokering, and being a leader in charting a new world order based on multipolarity, justice, self-determination, international law. That's a huge threat to US militarism. So over and over and over again, and then of course the politics of it. China, not a parliamentary democracy. China, strong central government. China, Communist Party led. Huge threat to US political supremacy, which says US style Western parliamentary democracy is the only model that's allowed to stand because it's the friendliest to the elites, the 1% that want to steal everything, plunder everything, and turn everything into a profit margin to be gobbled up at your expense. That is why China will never be off the chopping block. But the US's knife is incredibly dull. And the only option at its disposal is to take a to try to take a mallet to the world, or to start spreading kerosene around the kitchen and lighting a match. And that is where we are at in the world war. That's where we are with US-China relations. It's either the US plays ball in the court of international law, or it tries and it continues to try to spark an unthinkable conflict with China, which will end everything. Those are the two choices the United States has. The United States, at its current juncture, will not choose the latter. Well, it will choose the latter instead of the former. It will choose war. That war is coming. That's the warning I'm heeding to you, and I'm communicating to you to heed. And it's important to look at how the US is talking about China now to prepare the way for what is to come later. All right, everybody. We still got 2,000 people in the stream. Thank you so much for coming through. Please, we have a great ratio, so I'm not, hit the like button if you can, you want, but you all did an incredible job coming here. I really appreciate your support, your viewership, to everyone who is watching now. I'm going to get to shout outs and to super chats and to some brief announcements before I head out here tonight. Okay. So, all right. So, Where to begin? Where to begin? Where to begin? What did I say I was gonna do again? Yeah, shout outs. I do this at the end of every segment. All right. So number one, shout out to all the Patreon members who may be in the audience tonight. Patreon is the best place where you can support me. Patreon members get the ability to ask questions. I think there's actually a question for this stream that I will attempt to answer. And where are we? So Patreon members get the ability to answer, ask questions. They also can suggest guests, content, as well as get early access, get some audio. I also give them early notifications to streams. A lot of this is also given to YouTube members and Substack members where it is appropriate and allowable. So those are the best places to support me on an ongoing basis. In those places, so if you're on Substack, paid member, if you are a YouTube member here, if you are a Patreon member, I always want to shout all you out. Thank you so much for all of your support. And really, this work could not continue without you. So I do have a question from a Patreon member that I'm going to get to at the end here. But I want to get to the super chats, and then we will do some brief announcements before I give some comments. We have Juliet Leak. Thank you so much. I appreciate you as well. We have actually met in person, so it's really cool. And I really appreciate that support. So thank you so much, Juliet, for that. We have Far with the silent super chat. Thank you so much. Generous. And then we have Hassan Mahmoud. Thank you. All right. So those are it for the super chats for tonight. Let's see if we got any on. I don't know if Rumble can give me super chats yet. I don't see any. Someone said on Rumble they prefer to watch it on 2x speed. Well, that is impressive. Rockfin, we do have a tip from Laura Baza. Yay, Danny, great content, she says. Thank you so much, Laura from Rockfin. I have to figure out how to cash out tips on Rockfin. I always forget. I am what you would call a noob in the realm of cryptocurrency. So that is something I have to figure out. With all that said, everyone, just a quick, let's see if I can get a quick rundown. Well, I want to actually first express appreciations to the moderators today. I see Connie Connie says membership. Yes, this is true. Connie says membership includes a free PDF of my book. Okay. You see it up there, American Exceptionalism and American Innocence, a people's history of a people's history. What is the title again? Of fake news, a people's history of fake news from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror. It really encapsulates, I think, a lot of the work that, there was a time I was focusing on a whole gambit of topics, which I still definitely have opinions about and analyze, but I tend to laser focus on world developments now. But it goes over world developments. I have a history of Korea chapter in there. I have it's mainly a lot of different examples, both domestic and international, on how fake news via American exceptionalism, these ideologies of American exceptionalism, the innocence of the United States, have been deployed to misinform us about the key developments of our time. 2019, it's a little outdated, but nonetheless, you get a free PDF copy, and there's lots of relevant information in it. And of course, analysis on American exceptionalism, probably the most important ideology of the empire of our time. So Patreon members get a whole lot in that way. You can DM me. You can take part in the chat that we have there, the community chat. There's a lot going on Patreon. Substack is also a great place. YouTube membership is a great too. So let me just actually shout out to, I want to go back. So Connie, thank you for your comment. Plus you are now a moderator, or one of our newest moderators, Desert Mantis. Thank you so much for being a moderator. Where is in the audience tonight? Do we have any other I think that's it for the moderators from what I can see. No, Joe, we have Joe OWS. Welcome. Thank you so much to Joe. Creative Experiments was here too. Thanks so much, Creative Experiments, for being here and moderating. Do we have anyone else I can see? No, that's for the moderators. All right. We We have great moderators, a few new ones. So thank you to all of you. And so I'm going to answer. So first, brief announcements before I answer the Patreon member question quickly. It's December, and I'm noticing that there's a lot of holiday stuff. I'm actually not going away for the holidays, but I am visiting my home, you could say, this next weekend. So I won't be streaming for probably midweek next week. I'm trying to get folks on. I'm working on Richard Medhurst and a few others. Scott Ritter will be on the program hopefully the next week, middle of December, if all things go well. But I can tell that people are just less available at this time before the new year. So more solo streams to come. Okay. And maybe some creative collaborations to come. Okay. So stay tuned. That's all I have, really. Stay tuned. I'm trying to do more creative collaborations with some folks, find ways to mix it up a bit. But nonetheless, you will know more from YouTube community, and if you are a member on Patreon, Substack, and YouTube as a paid member, you get dibs to communicate things. You have guest suggestions. I will see them and respond to them much better there than elsewhere. So, anything else? That's it for the announcements. We had a Patreon member question, okay? I'll pull it up actually on the screen so you all get the feature here. So I post for everyone as early as possible. Sometimes I don't get up early enough, and I want to apologize to especially Patreon members, existing ones. But usually I say, leave the questions in the chat, in the comments. And so here it is from what do you see happening with the 1,000-ship flotilla heading towards Israel? Will Israel attack? You can't board 1,000 ships. So this is a good question. I don't know what's going to happen. I actually don't even know how fast this flotilla is coming. I know Turkey is the leader of it. Turkey's done this in the past, the Red Crescent. I know that they were instrumental, I believe, what was it, in the siege of Gaza, 2008-9, I believe it was. There was the Freedom Flotilla. That one was seized, and there was a lot of issues. I think Cynthia McKinney was on that one, and a whole host of activists. So will Israel attack? It's not out of the question. Now, 1,000, if Turkey truly is sending out 1,000 there, and I haven't been able to verify this, 1,000 is quite a lot. So I don't see Israel doing a full throttle attack or even being able to seize all of them or dock all of them or force or detain them. But I can't imagine that they would allow this to stand. Like, there would be no problems. I believe there will be problems with this on the Israeli side. However, the pressure, this is another thing to consider. The pressure on Israel right now to let up on the siege a bit economically in terms of aid is significant. So now that doesn't mean that, flotillas are going to be seen, because Israel controls those waters. They've always controlled the waters surrounding Palestine and Gaza. Doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to change that policy, but I can't imagine what kind of conflict it would bring if Israel were to attack all of them. Now, I've heard of this occurring. I can't verify that it's happening at the moment, that there's 1,000 ships going toward Gaza to send aid. Somehow there's just something that doesn't seem right, and I haven't been able to do the research on this. But if it does, it will be very sad. It said the Times of Israel, it seems like, has reported on this. The Jerusalem Post said, and here's what they said. I'll pull up the article. The Jerusalem Post said, unclear how big a threat the next Turkey flotilla really is. The first reports about the potential flotilla came out November 20th with bombastic predictions of 1,000 small vessels to challenge the Israeli Navy. But they don't know how big it is or how many actually are going to come. So I guess that's where we're at. Will they attack? I don't know. Will it be 1,000? I don't know. It would be a wonderful sight to see. But, I got to say, Turkey is a lot of talk a lot of the times. And you know what? A lot of these states are. The Axis of Resistance, they actually put their feet to the pavement, whether it's Yemen and what they've done to the Israeli ships, whether it is Hezbollah literally fighting on its border with Israel, whether it is the Iraqi and Syrian resistance groups attacking U.S. forces. I mean, these are forces that are actually fighting back. Turkey, on the other hand, I mean, beyond rhetoric and beyond some extensions of aid that, of course, have been blocked off ever since. I mean, let's be honest. There wasn't much aid coming to Gaza before October 7th. Now it's basically nothing. People are starving. I gotta say, I'm not too impressed with Erdogan or the monarchies or any of them. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't complexities. So I tend to take a position that is balanced and fair when it comes to the balance of forces at play, understanding that these countries were never liberators anyway. But at the same time, I get why there would be an emotional response to this, especially for Arabs and for Muslims of the region with connections to the region in the West Asia, North Africa area. I would get why this would be absolutely infuriating. And I would get why people who are not Muslims of the region or Arabs in the region or, people or with regard to people in the U.S. and the West, why they would also be infuriated by this because it's a humanitarian catastrophe. So what I'm trying to say here is that we shall see on this flotilla. We shall see. It's I guess I don't have so much confidence in the particular government at heart when it comes to Turkey, but at the same time, the popular pressure is immense. All of these governments from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Turkey with its I don't know, Sultan, as Pepe Escobar would call him. The new Ottoman Empire movements that he's trying to lead. All of them, they really do lean on the Palestine question for legitimacy, regardless of how much action they take on it. So we shall see how much popular pressure really does bring to bear some kind of outcome, like a flotilla fleet of this size. But nonetheless, I'm staking my bets, or I'm placing my bets on the axis of resistance to influence the outcome of this conflict more than whatever gestures of aid that nations like Turkey, leadership like Turkey, end up expressing. That's my opinion on it. All right, everybody. So we're about at the end here. I think there's one more super chat. We have Mark Bulmer say, "Go Danny, go!" Thank you so much, Mark. Maybe from Canada. Maybe you're not in Canada, but paying in Canadian dollars. So appreciate your contribution. All right, everybody. We had a wonderful stream tonight. Over 2,000 viewers. See me midweek next week. I will try to prepare something for all of you of some sort. We'll see whether I'll be joined by people or whether I'll be by myself. You will know. Before we go, though, be sure, if you haven't yet, hit that like button. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to hit that notifications bell. And if you're on Rockfin or Rumble or not on Rockfin or Rumble yet, be sure to go to Rockfin or Rumble. You can just search my name on those platforms, follow me on those platforms, because you never know when it's gonna end here. And I'm just gonna knock on plastic. I don't really got wood. I don't know if you heard that, but that's me knocking on wood. That it's not gonna happen anytime soon. But you never know. You really never know. And I have been, especially with the Palestine content, been facing at least individual demonetization whenever it's about Palestine. So that's just a fact on this platform called YouTube. We did have someone on Rockfin though, and I'll close it out here, who asked, "What's the situation in Taiwan?" Hector Medina asked. Situation in Taiwan, I will say, is I think there's a party called like the People's Party, the KMT. These parties that are more one China, unfortunately, they've remained divided. They won't unify as a ticket. It's going to split up the vote, and it could very well lead to a narrow victory, what looks like, for the DPP in the election. I'm hoping against that. There seems to be changing developments with those elections, because I think politics in Taiwan's administration are quite chaotic. But the election outcome may actually be a little bit overblown in terms of the direction of things, because the US's position globally is a little bit, how should I say, tenuous, in decline. It's quite likely that regardless of provocations that the US escalates with regard to Taiwan, it doesn't really matter. The leadership, the leadership of the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, in the authorities, it's the separatist party. While I can't vouch for its legitimacy on the island, because I know things are kind of complicated with what they've been able to do since they've had reign within the administration, I will say that the longer that they are, in power, so to speak, within the local authority, the longer that, the more so that they will delegitimize themselves, because essentially what people like Tsai Ing-wen and what Lai Ching-te will do if he's elected is they're going to go for the Ukraine model, and look at how that's paid off for Zelensky. And in this case, they will have less legitimacy, because unlike Ukraine, which was recognized as, however, whatever you think of that or not, I know regular Sparky, he's not. They're not here today. Sparky would say, make Ukraine Russia again. So regardless of whatever you think about Ukraine's sovereignty, whether it should be a sovereign country given its makeup, its history, whether you acknowledge the fall of the Soviet Union, the fact of the matter is that the Ukrainian state, Ukraine, was recognized by the UN as a full member state of the General Assembly, while Taiwan has absolutely no such status. So that means that separatism can only stand to become more and more illegitimate the more and more that the DPP adopts the Ukraine model for its policy, for its political and foreign policy. And so I don't really believe the outcomes of the February elections are going to be monumental in any kind of way, because I don't see the KMT. Maybe something will change and I'm not aware of it yet, but I don't see the KMT right now as having a chance if there isn't a unified ticket. All right. Somebody said, can't I change the valves in your radiator? That's a good point. Probably not. I live in an apartment, so like an old pre-war building. I don't think so. I'd have to ask my super though. All right, everybody. I think I'm gonna head out. Okay, this was great. Somebody said get a house. Yeah, Sure. I'll get right on that. Here I am asking people to help me become sustainable independent. I wish I could get a house. I can't afford it right now. Somebody asked if I know Jackson Hinkle. Yes, I know Jackson Hinkle. We unfortunately had spats early on. He got taken off of here, which was rough. But yeah, no, we have disagreements. But yeah, he got taken down from here, so that was messed up because yeah, I'm totally opposed to that kind of censorship. But in any event, got a dog. I do have a dog. I will not do the dog talk tonight because it's already too late, and I got to head out of town tomorrow. So yeah, we are out of here, and you know, we will be back. Okay. Let's see. Maybe I'm forgetting shout outs if there's any YouTube members. I didn't see any YouTube members in the audience, so I couldn't shout any of you out. Usually you all have a badge, but maybe some of you who are here don't have a badge yet. I don't know if that's I think everyone gets a badge, right? So yeah, man, the jokes. I want to hear the jokes because sometimes I don't know if you remember when Biden visited Kiev a while ago and Kiev put on the sirens acting like there was actually danger when in fact there was no danger. It was fake. But they were definitely trying to cause some kind of stir, right? Because they're always trying to cause a stir. Sometimes I think about that moment when my sirens go off. My sirens, what am I saying? My neighborhood's constant sirens. So for those of you who don't know, I'm also a part-time therapist and I do remote therapy. And let's just say the interruptions are quite frequent because I don't use this setup. And so actually, the shitty gains on laptop microphones, I get to put on mute, but if I'm talking, it's like the interruptions are quite nightmarish. So that's the sirens, that's what you get for living, living in the hood, but it's the only place I can afford to live in. People are talking about getting sound. Yeah, nah, I would, but my wife won't let me. My wife would never allow me to put on sound foam onto our walls, our ceilings and walls. Never. I cannot. I cannot do that. I've asked nicely, and she said absolutely not because that is incredibly ugly. So until we can get a place where I have my own studio, which hopefully will be someplace, then someday in the near, maybe hopefully year or two, until I can get a studio, like a room to have like as a studio, there will be no soundproofing of the walls. Mm. I am mostly the domestic labor of the house, but I do not get to decide whether something as ugly as sound panels get to grace the walls of our apartment. And unfortunately, they don't really make them to put them on and off. I would put in that work, but to be honest, the space is a little too spacious for that to really. It would have to be a lot. Danny, what is your opinion? Possible the United States will start a nuclear war to reset the system? Anything is possible. The miscalculation of such a decision would be just, reset. When I think about reset, I think about how people like Blinken, Biden, even a Trump, and of course the people that control them, the bankers, Wall Street, the big corporations, the military industrial complexes, the investors, the CEOs in those sectors. Think about that, and I think if you try to reset with nuclear annihilation, you will not be there will be no more system. Like the means of production and everything of that sort will be destroyed. And now, mind you, this is also banking on the fact that they would have the gall and the stones, so to speak, to use the crass term, to dare China and Russia to not retaliate, because ultimately any kind of nuclear exchange is going to include those three countries. That's how the world has shaped out, and it would be quite the decision. That's why it always amazes me that there is so much provocation toward Russia and China that make it more and more possible, because to do so would really, we're talking about a cataclysmic event that we've already seen when it comes to just how these smaller steps toward that goal, encirclement, proxy war, all that has led to really damaging consequences for the system itself too, for this empire. To lay waste to it all feels, how should I say, suicidal. But at the end of the day, sometimes desperation, when you're losing your grip on power and the world order, and perhaps countries around the world are saying, hey, we don't want to just be at the whims of your profiteering and your exploitation and your dominance and hegemony, that maybe that would cause a suicidal act to occur. But to reset the system, no, that would be destroying the system. There would be no resetting. All right. All right, everybody. That's it for me. All right. You all have been great. You all have been beautiful. Thanks so much for tuning in. Before you go, hit that like button, subscribe button, notifications bell if you're on Rockfin or Rumble. Thank you so much. Go there. Danny Dhaiphong. Hit the thumbs up, share it, all that good stuff. Go to the video description and support this work monetarily if you can. There's Patreon, Substack, PayPal, buy me a coffee, and you become a YouTube member. Those are the best places. Patreon being the number one, where you get many different kinds of features. And know that come this holiday season, you are supporting independent media and you are helping me get on my way to a siren-free, slightly larger housing situation where my wife and I can actually not get disturbed by incredible levels of noise. So if you are in support of that modest effort, I salute all of you who already support, are thinking about supporting, or are going to support after this stream tonight. In any event, take good care. Thanks to everyone. Otherwise, thanks to all the viewers. I will be back midweek. Catch me on X, Telegram. You can find those in my video description. Actually, not X, but just search my name on X, Danny Dhaiphong. And I will be back with many announcements to come. Bye-bye. Good night. And I will see you. And I will see you all again. Thanks to all the moderators and to all those who make this channel possible, including you viewers. Bye-bye.